there's been a hell of a lot of stories coming out of the European Union within the past few years that talk about the rise of neo-fascism. And there's plenty of examples. You have the Golden Dawn Party in Greece. There's a new adoration of Mussolini in Italy. The National Front in France, which is a far-right party, is literally the most popular party in France today, according to a new opinion poll. So this is some really scary stuff. And Alternet wrote a great article about this where they talk about why that rise has happened, the rise in neo-fascism. It all started with the crash in 2008, because instead of the individual countries in the European Union addressing their own recession/depression-like conditions, what happened is the IMF and the central bank controlled fiscal policy for the entire European Union, and they cracked down with austerity policies. They didn't do stimulus, they did austerity. And that ended up hurting the people in the European Union very much. And needless to say, it agitated them and it made them feel like there was no hope. And what happens when you have a political and economic crisis of that magnitude like we had in 2008? Well, what happens is a rise of extremist political parties. Always throughout history that happens. Whenever there's a recession or a depression, people look for answers, they look for hope. And people on the far right and the far left can be very charismatic. They can have very strong ideas about specifically who's to blame and why. And these things people find appealing when there seems like there's no hope. I mean, Hitler rose out of depression-like conditions, right? So here's the relevant part of the article to the American people. Quote, "That's the main reason America has not seen a comparable rise in fascism like what's happening in the European Union. In this country, we still have institutions such as Social Security and Medicare, which were designed during the New Deal and the Great Society, and by and large work extremely well. Europe, unfortunately, seems determined for now to go in an opposite direction, reviving old historic enmities and rivalries in the process. That could be in store for us if we follow a similar route, which would make the Tea Party seem like a Tea Party in comparison." So what they're saying, and I honestly never thought about this, but it does strike a chord. What they're saying is the only reason why we haven't seen like the level of neo-fascist extremism in the US, like we see in huge numbers going on in certain places in the European Union right now, is because in the US, there's still a strand of hope. That hope being Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, you could argue unemployment insurance, you can argue welfare, you could argue other programs that make sure that you don't just die in the street, right? Those are like the last lines of hope that are keeping people, you know, not in the streets with pitchforks doing the Hail Hitler signs or doing, you know, some crazy neo-Confederate take up our rifles and march on Washington kind of shit. Even though there was one person who wanted to do that recently, but it didn't end up happening. And it's true, if you look at the level of neo-fascism in Europe versus in the US, it's not nearly as big in the US because when we had the Great Recession, there were problems with Dodd-Frank, big time, big loopholes, but we did some market regulation. We also did the stimulus. It was a third tax cuts, which is bad. It should have been direct stimulus spending. It should have been all infrastructure, green technology, all that stuff. We did some stimulus, right? Not as much, not the right kind, but we did some. And we also haven't chipped away yet at Medicare, Social Security, and the safety net. But what they're saying is if that happens, you wait and you watch, and there will definitely be a neo-fascist movement in the United States that comes up, because when people feel like there's absolutely no hope, they go to the most extremes. And that's what this is here.